Hi, I'm Scientific Illustrator Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Create's Go Out and Sketch Midnight Magic instructional video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sketch the midnight magic by applying what you learned in your step-by-step lesson. You can follow along with this lesson even if you don't have a lesson kit. Help this tiny business by clicking that like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and shopping for future creates at naturesketchcreate.com. First, make sure you have all the materials you need before you go out to sketch. Go out to sketch a midnight magic or something similar at a park, garden, or maybe even at your home. Today I'm sketching from a clipping of a midnight magic. Remember, this is just a sketch. It's meant to be relaxing and fun, so take your time, observe nature, and don't get too caught up with accuracy. Let's get started. So first you want to determine what you want included in your drawing that you will be painting and where it will be located and on the page and how it will be located. So you can draw just like our final reference image. This whole part of the plant, so I have the trimming that's similar, and you can put your paper right behind it without clipping the plant off and trace around the different parts to try to get the sizing. Or you can just take a clipping and lay it on top of your paper and trace around it. And I think I might include just up to here. This looks like about the right size. I might trim it just a little bit more. Sometimes I use my kneaded eraser to help me. I'm going to use it as an anchor on the other side to keep it up a little bit. It's a little too flat on the page. And I want to make sure this is turned in a way that kind of profiles those flowers rather than straight on. A little more similar to our final reference image, the image we created for our step-by-step. So, and you can even turn your page instead of the plant. It takes a little bit of time to figure out how you want that arranged. I think that looks good. And so now I'm just going to draw some simple shapes and maybe do some tracing by kind of drawing right under the shape and adding in a line here. And alternatively, you can just have the plant to the side. You don't have to have your paper behind it. You could just start with the simple shapes while looking at the plant. I find this helps with placement by just putting it right behind the plant, kind of tracing it like we did with step one, where we transferred the image. And you don't have to include everything. You can pick and choose. So this clump from my point of view is a little bit disorienting, and you can only see tiny parts of it behind this flower. So I think I'll just include the flower and not this clump here to make it a little bit more clear. Oops. And unlike an animal, it's not moving, but my head is moving a little bit. If I tap it, it moves a little bit. So it's not going to be exactly the same. Like if you had a photo, it wouldn't be moving at all. The perspective wouldn't change at all because you just have the flat picture. And this might look a little bit different to you than it does me as well. Camera angle's a little different from my view of the plant, so I'm drawing it right now. And when I move the plant away from the paper, my view will probably change a little bit too. But So I'll use this as a guide. It won't be an absolute. It just skips the step of guessing where things are supposed to be, and it gives me an approximate size to start with. It's a faster way to get a sketch started. And I might stop, probably going to stop right here with the sketch. So you can decide where you want and what you want included. And again, it's just a real rough sketch underneath, using simple shapes, tracing around on the paper where I think the outline would be of each part of this flower here. And yeah, I think I'll add this. Just kind of wasn't sure if I wanted to add this last flower here, but I'll go ahead and add it. Again, I'm not erasing much. I have lines here I will only erase if it's confusing me. Very simple shapes because you can't really trace right under this one. It's elevated off the page. And then I'll try to keep this in the same basic position and just move it over to the side. But again, since my head moved, the plant moves too. So this gives me the sizing and the basic placement, but this drawing will change a lot from here still. So I'll go ahead and start at the top. You can start whatever makes sense to you. And I'll work down, just redefining each part, and adding leaves where needed, basing it all on that initial lighter sketch. So I'm using some darker marks this time. I realize my flowers are not quite in the right position when I move this, so I'm going to orient this so my flowers look the right way while I'm drawing. I'll just leave that top drawing the way it is. Probably adjust this a little bit. And when you're drawing, you can figure out where things are. So I'm looking at this leaf and down to this flower and kind of determining where related to this leaf the different flower parts are so that I can draw them in. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I think that this is enough. And so I'll leave these lines here and any other lines that I have that are a little lighter marks. But I'll go ahead and move on with this drawing. I think the number of flowers and leaves are enough for this demonstration. And this is the Midnight Magic. And in the rest of this white space, make sure to go ahead and leave any kinds of observations, how you were feeling, any insects you saw on the plant, the weather, how doing this sketch made you feel, anything you like. This is your journal, and don't feel like you have to include the scientific and common name if you don't want to. You can also put in the date, and you can also pull flowers off and blow them up, or do the whole thing just one single flower or just like a few leaves. It doesn't have to be the whole plant. Just trying to do this as similar as possible to our step-by-step image to make it easier for demonstration. There are many different ways to do this. Don't overthink it, just do what feels right for you. And so now I'll go ahead and move on to adding some paint. So next I'm going to add some paint. I'm going to use the paints I already mixed for my step-by-step lesson. And I'll just add a little bit of water to them to revive them. So I'll squeeze the barrel of my water brush, or if you're using more of a traditional watercolor brush, just add a little bit of water from whatever vessel you have, just so that it moves smoothly in your palette. So you don't want it to be super thick where it's going to get stuck while you're painting. Just want to add enough so that when you're painting, it moves. Kind of like that. You can test it out on your paper. Might need just a little bit more. And just like with our step-by-step, I'm going to use the wettest, lightest version of this color. So I'm going to revive what we mixed before with a little bit of that paint. I'm adding a little bit more pigment then. And I'm going to make it the wettest, lightest, or the least amount of pigment, more water to pigment in my palette, not on my paper. So I'm adding that water here with just a little bit of pigment, dabbing it off on my towel, and then testing it out so it appears lighter in color because it has less pigment in it compared to the amount of water. So I'm going to pick up that paint, and just like with our step-by-step, I'm going to go ahead and add it over all of the green areas. And this is a little different from my reference, but I'm going to trust my drawing because I decided just to leave it. It was in the wrong position when I first moved it. And then I changed a few things. And this is something that I could note on the side here. Changed position, just make a little note there. And it's just a sketch. It's meant to be a quick observation, study of this plant, not necessarily exact. And just going throughout and adding it like I would with a marker or a crayon, just putting it over the entire space. Not overthinking it, just adding it in. Not worrying too much about filling the space in completely, or if I'm outside of the lines, because I can redefine those lines later. And when some of the paint is outside of the lines, it adds this really fun, sketchy look. And I'm not going to add any paint to this. I could, maybe I'll add just a tiny bit leading into that. Just a light green hint. So that's a stylistic choice, what you like to do. I'm going to clean off my brush, and then I'm going to pick up the next paint, the Midnight Purple. So I'm going to revive that. This has very little paint in it, so it's not going to really pick up a lot of color, but this medium concentrated color here in the middle should have enough pigment to it that I can revive that with a little bit of water, so it kind of moves around, and add a little bit to this area here with more water. That should be enough pigment to get the color we're looking for. I'm dabbing it off on my towel. Oh, definitely. Actually, it's a little too dark. So I want it to look lighter. going to add a little more water to it to make it appear lighter again. So it's wet in our palette. I'm dabbing it off onto my towel and then I'm using it to paint. So it's not applying a lot of water to the paper itself. And I'm just going to add this to all the spots that are purple. And if you need a finer tip, you can just roll your tip on your towel and pick up paint whenever you need it. Dab it on your towel and then reapply. If it ends up being a little bit dark, you can just dab it on your towel and then keep on painting. It releases a little bit of pigment on your towel rather than continuing to add it to your painting. And just to continue with some of this, I'm going to add a little bit, just a hint of the purple there. Cleaning off my brush. And this should dry rather fast, so I'm going to dab this. I can start adding some more to the green areas because it's dry. That's because we're not adding a lot of water to the paper itself. So now I'm going to add another layer of this green, but a different kind of green, one that's a little less yellow. And I'm reviving that like I did with the other green color, the yellow green. Adding a little bit of water, just kind of moving it in there until it moves right, and I can test out if it's moving just a little bit more. I'm going to move it to the side. Then test it out. Looks about right. And then I'm going to add it like I did in my step-by-step. So I'm just adding it sparingly throughout. The kind of these shadowed areas, so anywhere you see a little bit more shadow, just adds a little bit of definition. And since I can't see the plant because I decided to change this, it's a little bit confusing, but you can kind of add it to the lower sides or the right side because the light is coming in, creating shadows on the bottom. And it's a little darker in some areas, so just kind of adding that in. And I did miss adding a little purple here, but I can go back and do that in a few minutes. And I'll continue with the green so I don't have to clean my brush in between. And of course, I'm not being super exact about placement, just kind of adding it in spaces without covering up all of the lighter color underneath. Just giving it a little bit more contrast so it pops off that page. It's popping towards the left. I keep having to press it down a little bit. To clean off my brush, I'm going to pick up that purple again and add it where I missed it. Again, I add just a little bit here as well. So I missed a couple of those buds. I'm cleaning off my brush, and then I'll move on to adding a little bit more purple. So now I'm going to add the driest, darkest purple color. I'm going to revive the purple here, adding a little bit more water. Dab it off on my towel, test it out, it moves well. And I'm just going to add it in to the darker areas that I see in my flower. So pretty sparingly, but again, I'm not being exact. If it's a little too dark, just dab it off onto your towel. And you'll want to leave some of those lighter colors underneath showing through, and that'll make it, again, pop off the page a bit more by having some lighter areas and some darker areas. It's a little too dark, so I'm gonna add a little bit more water to that. Dab it on my towel and continue. You can test it on your test paper if you like. Still had a little bit too much pigment, so I dabbed it on my towel. My head is constantly changing, so this is always changing too. So you need to remember not to be exact, not to worry too much. So if you're painting and you think things look a little different, just go with it and just keep going. Don't worry about the fact that it looks different, because every time you look at it, it'll look a little bit different. Only if you're painting from a photo will it stay the same. And then I'm going to clean off my brush. And then I'm going to move my palette so I can use these other colors. And I'm going to revive the Midnight Red Purple. I'm going to use this lighter version. I do want to add some more pigment to it, and probably a little too much. So I'll move it off to the side so there's less pigment and more water. Dab it on my towel and test it out on my paper. Looks pretty good. Maybe just a little bit more pigment to that. Add a little bit in, test it out. That looks a little better. And I'm just going to add it like I see on my plant. So it's in the stem. And mostly on this right side where I see it. And then some of the calyx and these little stems here as well. So just add it to wherever you observe it on your plant. And then, oops, there's one spot I forgot. And then clean off your brush and add some of the blue-green here. So I'm going to add more water to that to revive it. If at any time the paint isn't vibrant enough or you run out, you can always mix more. And I keep all my paints next to me so that I can mix more if I need to. I'm just adding a little bit more water to that. I'm going to use this drier, darker version of this color. I just need a little bit more water so that it moves well on my paper. So there you go. Don't want it too thick with pigment or it won't, or just stay in one spot, kind of clump up. That looks good. And I'm just going to add that sparingly in the darker areas, kind of the shadowed areas again, but only in the darkest shadowed areas. And a lot of these leaves I can't see, so I'm just going to pick this up. Kind of view them a little bit. You might be getting a little wilty. It's also in a different position. Some flowers don't do well. Actually, a lot of flowers don't do well once picked. It's better just to paint from the actual plant. But for demonstration, I did pick this flower. Sometimes you can preserve it a little bit more by putting it in some water or wrapping a wet towel around the stem. So just adding this into the areas where I see that are darker and preserving the colors underneath again. I'm going to clean off my brush and I'm going to take a little bit of this purple. It's not this really dark, highly pigmented color or the wet, lower pigmented color. Something in between. I'm going to check it out on my page. A little bit more water. It looks about the same. That'll probably work. And I'm just going to add it over these petals sparingly, just covering them up. I'm also going to add them to the stigmas here. Tips of these stigmas are pretty dark. I'm going to clean off my brush and go ahead and move on to adding some ink lines. So lastly, I'm going to add some ink lines. I'm going to start with the smallest tipped black micron, the 0.05 micron. I'm going to redraw the common name and the scientific name first. And then I'm going to redraw all of the lines for the flower, and you don't have to stick with what you drew originally. You can redefine them based on where the paint landed and what you're seeing now. You may want to change the shape of the leaves a little bit. And this is a quick sketch of it, nothing exact. Just getting an idea of this plant. Don't get too caught up with details, getting sizing or shape exactly right. And anything you notice that you're not able to include in your drawing, you can just write on the white area on the outside. This plant has such a beautiful fragrance while I'm working with it right now. Very nice. If you need to, feel free to manipulate your flower or your plant a little bit to get it back into that similar position. When you have all those lines added, move on to the slightly larger micron, the 0.1 micron. And I'm going to use this just to thicken up the common name. And then I'm just going to use it to thicken up some of the lines, maybe some lines in the stigmas, some of the less apparent lines in the calyx. Some really minor lines that I think just need to be standing out just a little bit more. Feel free to move the plant around to get it back into a view that you had drawn. Does that make sense if it kind of fell or wilted like mine did? And again, I'm not being very exact, just getting a few lines in. The line variation makes it pop from the page a little bit more. And then lastly, add the 0.8 black micron. And I'm going to use that to thicken the common name, and then just use some lines throughout, kind of sparingly, the side of the stem, just to give it that pop of line variation. And if used sparingly, help make it look a little more three-dimensional, even though we just used a few layers of paint and a couple pens. Again, it is just a sketch. so don't get too carried away. And now I'm done. Great job observing your world, and keep practicing. Check out the Nature Sketch Crate website to sign up for the newsletter and to shop for future crates. Please share your art on our Facebook fan art page and use the hashtag NatureCrateArt to have it featured on our social media. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you have any questions or would like to see a particular plant or animal featured in a future lesson, please leave it in the comments below. Thank you again for joining me.